Super Mario Advance for the Game Boy Advance. This was a launch title, March 2001, when the Game Boy Advance launched. Coincidentally, I bought myself a clear purple Game Boy Advance, just like this one, not this exact one, and a copy of Super Mario Advance. I thought this was a great launch title for the Game Boy Advance. Right off the bat, what it's doing here is it's showing you the extra resolution that you're getting coming from the Game Boy Color, and going to the Game Boy Advance. So this game starts off, it's kind of cropped with this faded look, and then it fades in the full screen. You realize you've got a wide screen now, and a higher resolution than you had with the Game Boy Color. Again, I thought that was a great idea, and I thought this was a great launch title for the Game Boy Advance. This game introduced a few extras, so we have Mario Bros is included, the original arcade game. That's something that they continued to do with all the sequels for the Super Mario Advance line. And just some upgraded graphics. You can see some scaling effects here when you're choosing a player. They obviously added the voices. I think there was some voices on the Super Nintendo version of like Super Mario All-Stars, Super Mario Bros. 2, but this has even more voices and even some more upgraded graphics. So it's not a direct port of like Super Mario All-Stars on the Super Nintendo, which you might think it would be. And yeah, it's a great game overall. One issue I'm noticing right now, I don't actually remember this issue back in the day. Maybe I didn't notice it or just didn't know any better back then. But there is still a cropped resolution from the original NES version, believe it or not. And so the camera has to do this thing where it pans up and down sometimes. And it does pan a little bit slower up and down than it does left to right. So yeah, it's a little bit annoying, but that's not really a fault of the game as much as it is the system. Again, the NES resolution, it was 240p, so it had 240 lines of horizontal resolution, and the Game Boy Advance is, oh my gosh, I think it's 160p. What is the exact resolution? It's 240 by 160, and so it's not 16 by 9. It's like a 3:2 ratio, so it's wider than a 4:3 ratio, but it's not as wide as a 16:9 ratio. As you can see, we're watching this on YouTube in a 16:9 frame, and we do have black bars on the sides, but of course it's a wider screen than we had on the Game Boy Color, and again it's a higher resolution, a little bit in the horizontal. But again, at 160p, it's still not as high of a horizontal resolution as the original NES was at 240p. So, again, not really a fault of the game as much as it is just porting it to a system at a lower resolution. It's going to be cropped. And it's not as bad as like Super Mario Bros Deluxe was on the Game Boy Color. But it can still be an issue. Yeah, so anyways, back to this game. I love the way this game looks. I think the graphics are great. The music is great. Yes, it has that typical Game Boy Advance crunchy, kind of like distorted, overly compressed sound that you might not notice when you're playing on the little speaker of the Game Boy Advance, but if you're playing it on an emulator or you're playing it with headphones, definitely something that you'll notice. The Game Boy Advance, it's always been that way. As far as I know, most of the games on it just sound that way, and that's okay. I think the music's still good for what it is. Some people might find the voices a little bit annoying. My wife played this game for like 5 minutes, and the first thing she said was, wow, these voices are really annoying. They're a little excessive. It's cool they fit a lot of voices in there. Like I said, they put a lot of extra voices into this game, but they could get annoying for some. I don't mind them too much, especially with Mario. Maybe with some of the other characters, it's a little bit more annoying. But yeah, there's a lot of voices. You might find them annoying. You might not.
Thank you. Bravo! Choose a player. Here we go.
So apparently Luigi isn't my jam. That was kind of funny. Now, this is a game that I grew up with. I grew up playing Super Mario Bros. 2 on the NES. And then, a long time had passed. By the time the Game Boy Advance launched, I hadn't played Super Mario Bros. 2 in a long time. So it was fun to go back and play it. We had the upgraded graphics and sound and everything. But it was just getting to play a game that I hadn't played in a long time. And sort of remembering maybe some of the secrets, but certainly not all of them. And the same thing's kind of happening now. I hadn't played this game in a long time. I probably haven't played this game in like 10 years. And so I just recently picked up a copy of Super Mario Advance. Again, I bought this at launch with the Game Boy Advance. But I wasn't a collector back then, so when the Game Boy Advance came out, I sold my Game Boy Color to buy a Game Boy Advance, and then when the SP came out, I sold my original Game Boy Advance to buy an SP, etc., etc. So this wasn't the original Game Boy Advance that I owned when it came out. It's the same color, like I said, but not the exact same system, and this isn't the same copy of Super Mario Advance. Again, I probably sold that when the DS came out or something, and I sold all my GBA SP and all my GBA games. And now that I'm a collector, I want to have the ones that I really liked and hang on to them. So recently I picked up a copy of this, and again, having not played it in about 10 years, it's a nostalgic trip again. I remember some of the secrets, but certainly not all of them. There's so many secrets I know I'm forgetting, and there's things I kind of remember. I'm like, maybe there's a secret, under this quicksand if I let myself sink, but I don't really remember it that well. It's been long enough that it's fun to play it again. And so, yeah, this is a fun way to play a great game with some great upgrades. Is it the definitive way to play this game? Probably not. I don't know. There was the Super Mario All-Stars re-released for Wii, although I guess you're still not getting some of the add-ons this has, so yeah, what is the definitive Super Mario Bros. 2? Is it this, or is it like the All-Stars version? You get the higher resolution with the All-Stars version, but there is some extra graphics and extra voices and some extra little bonus kind of goals and stuff that you can get that were added into this one. So I'm not sure if there's a version that precedes this with a higher resolution. All the updates this has with the higher resolution, obviously that would be the way to play it. But I don't know. Maybe this is the definitive version, if you will. Maybe worth mentioning, talking about the definitive version of this game, I do realize most of us are aware of the history of this game. By that I mean how this was originally a game released in Japan on the Famicom called Doki Doki Panic. That was not a Mario game at all. This was a completely different game released in Japan that I guess Nintendo of America decided to take that game and basically do a sprite hack to it and turn it into our Super Mario Bros. 2. So this is what we grew up with. If you were in North America, or I guess Europe, and outside of Japan, this was your Super Mario Bros. 2. And again, it's a great game. It's just that maybe it's not really the real Super Mario Bros. 2. So there's that whole thing talking about the history of this game. But again, if you grew up with this as your Super Mario Bros. 2, no arguing that it is a very fun game. Again, lots of secrets, most of which I have forgotten. But definitely worth checking out. Again, this is a great version. I'm very glad I recently picked this up again for the Game Boy Advance. If you have a Game Boy Advance or any means to play Game Boy Advance games, this is definitely one, I think, to keep and have in your collection. I think it's a great game. Again, I think it was a great launch title. I think they did a great job of really showing off what you were getting with the new Game Boy Advance system at the time. And so, yeah, definitely check it out, and definitely pick up a copy if you play Game Boy Advance games or have a Game Boy Advance collection. But anyways, I think that's it. I think I will stop recording it here. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to stop playing it. I'm just going to stop recording. And so that will be that, and see you guys later.
No problem.